Welcome to The Current, the North Central Water Network's Speed Networking webinar series. For those who aren't familiar with the North Central Regional Water Network, we are a 12-state extension-led collaboration dedicated to stewarding water resources and increasing the scope and positive impact of extension and water outreach work. We've been doing the Current webinar series for 10 years now. This is actually our 99th webinar. And each month we feature a different water-related topic and feature 3 presenters that talk a little bit about their research and program of work around that topic. Today, I'm excited to feature agroforestry and water resource management. We've heard a lot about different edge of field practices, and today we're going to be talking about agroforestry, whether that comes in the form of an edge of field practice through a windbreak or a riparian buffer, or whether it is agroforestry in terms of tree and fruit farming. So we have 3 great presenters for you. A few housekeeping items for you before we get started. We will have a Q&A session for all 3 of our speakers after they each present, and I will take questions out of the Q&A panel. So please put your questions in there. The chat, we have the chat as well. You can use that for introducing yourself to other participants or to sharing links or for any technical difficulties you might have, but please keep the Q&A questions to the Q&A box so that we ensure we see them during the Q&A portion. If you're having any audio issues, there is a phone-in option that can be accessed by clicking the up arrow on the mute icon and then clicking switch to phone. This is recorded, and we will post this recording as well as the webinar slides to our website at northcentralwater.org. You can visit that website and go to our media archive and find the recordings from all of our past 99 webinars. All right. So without too much, we will go ahead and get started. We have 3 great speakers lined up for you today who are going to be talking about agroforestry and water quality. Nate Lawrence from the Savanna Institute, Billy Beck from Iowa State Extension and Outreach, and Ranjith Udawatta from the University of Missouri Center for Agroforestry. So we will go ahead and jump right in so we allow plenty of time for questions and discussion. First off is Nate. Nate is going to be talking about agroforestry and what it means for water quality in the Midwest, as well as giving a little bit of an introduction. Nate is with the Savanna Institute, for those that might not be familiar with the organization, and he got his PhD from Iowa State University. So been based here with Iowa, Wisconsin, and Illinois, and going to be talking a little bit about agroforestry in the Midwest. Thanks so much. I'm going to stop sharing and hand off to you, Nate.
Thank you very much for the introduction and for the invitation to share some of our work. Can everyone see that all right?
Looks great.
Okay, great. I'm going to start the presentation today with a little overview of what is agroforestry. We're going to try to cover that topic, which is a pretty big topic, pretty quickly, and then I'll share a little bit of data that we've collected on agroforestry's impacts on water quality. So first of all, who is the Savanna Institute? We're a nonprofit based in the upper Midwest. So we cover several upper Midwest states. This is a picture from our 10th anniversary meeting last year. So this is all the folks that I get to work with on a day-to-day basis. I'm back here in the back. I was hired a little over 2 years ago, and I am senior to about 2/3 of the people in this picture, which is a way to say that we've grown a lot very, very quickly. So it's been really exciting to be working with this team and working on this, this set of practices that people find so inspiring. So very briefly, I'm going to use a definition from our executive director for agroforestry. He says it's farming with trees on purpose. And that is a little bit tongue-in-cheek in that it's incredibly broad. It covers a lot of different things, and agroforestry is incredibly broad and covers a lot of different things. I find that often people are more familiar with the practices of agroforestry than they are with the general term agroforestry. So let's dive straight into that, and we'll cover 4 practices that we can consider agroforestry practices. The first I'll touch on is silvopasture, the intentional integration of trees, pasture, and livestock managed in a single system. So here we have a picture of that from one of our demonstration farms, some cattle in a thinned woodland. You can sort of think of this as, in a very broad sense, replicating a savanna type ecosystem with a grazed understory of grassland and then trees above. The trees could have been pre-existing to the site, like they were here, or they could be planted and we could be adding trees to existing pastures. Alley cropping is the cultivation of crops in alleys between rows of trees or shrubs. This picture is from another of our demo farms in central Illinois, back very close to where I grew up. And you can see here rows of native hardwood trees planted into a very conventional Midwest ag system. So we're demonstrating here that trees can be part of a lot of different food systems. We can add trees to almost any agricultural system that you can come up with. A lot of alley crops will also focus on fruit or nut production, and then doing something between those producing trees, which is useful, growing a crop maybe for the first few years, or even harvesting hay as something that can continue even after the trees are mature. Windbreaks are pretty self-explanatory and probably one that you're pretty familiar with. Strips of trees and shrubs designed to enhance crop and livestock production while providing conservation benefits. This picture is from the NRCS and is pretty great for the scale of windbreaks that exist out there on the landscape. I would love to see windbreaks being planted out today in the way that they have been in the past. And then finally, riparian buffers. So strips of permanent vegetation along a stream, lake, or wetland. And riparian buffers are designed specifically for improving water quality outcomes. So we're particularly excited about water quality in all of our work and all of our practices, but riparian buffers are kind of the most logical, practice for if we want to do one thing to improve water quality with agroforestry. This is a practice that is literally designed to maximize that outcome. So let's think very briefly about how, on a theoretical sense, agroforestry might change water quality, and then we'll get into some actual data to inform this. So our current landscapes are typically dominated by annuals. This leaves the landscape totally devoid of vegetation. This image on the left is not far off. If you were to go drive around much of the Midwest right now, you would see very little growing. You would see a lot of soil erosion from heavy rains recently. You would see evidence the water and soil are running off the surface of the landscape. And then, of course, this contributes to problems downstream when all that sediment, all that water runs off very quickly, all the nutrients it carries ends up in receiving waters and contributing to harmful algal blooms, as well as a range of other problems, including human drinking water concerns as well. So as we transition to the right, a landscape that includes a lot of elements of agroforestry, we see a more perennial nature across much of the landscape. So there's never a period where there is nothing there holding the soil intact and holding nutrients intact as well. We see a riparian buffer along the stream, providing the benefits directly to that stream system. As we move further up, you might see something like alley cropping. So there may still be a place for annual crops, but now we're thinking about those annual crops with what are effectively terraces of perennial woody vegetation. So now let's get into some actual data, and I'm going to present this pretty quickly, but we do have some preliminary data from resin lysimeters that we installed at a site, which I'll describe in a moment. Resin lysimeters are PVC discs, essentially, that we bury in the ground. They sorb out infiltrating ions as they percolate through the soil, as they percolate down. And then we dig them up after a set period of time, extract them, and analyze them for different nutrients that we're interested in. So we have nitrate and ammonium to present today. I'll be running these samples for phosphorus here in a couple weeks. We buried these at a ½ meter down, so that's below a lot of the rooting zone, and we deployed them for 1 year. So we're basically getting an entire year of nutrient leaching underneath whatever is above the lysimeters. So at this site, we had a corn silage field. This is at one of our demo sites near Spring Green, Wisconsin, in the southwest part of the state. We have a corn silage field. There's a grassed waterway in between, and then in an adjacent and opposite field on very similar soils, we have a young hazelnut planting. The hazelnuts are grown in an alley crop context, so there's vegetation in between the hazelnuts, in this case, a cover crop which included clover and also oats, and then eventually transitioned to pasture grasses. And if we kind of look at the field site on the hazelnut side, the hazelnut field, we have these young trees that were planted right before these lysimeters were installed. We have the row that the trees are in, and then we have the space in between the rows of trees. So we effectively have at least 3 zones where you might expect to see different management practices having different impacts on nutrient leaching. So we installed all of the lysimeters on the hazelnut side of this field site in approach of picking a focal tree, putting one lysimeter right under that tree, one along the row, but not under a tree, and then one directly in between 2 rows of trees to capture that alley effect. And then briefly, there were manure and urea ammonium nitrate, nitrogen additions to the silage field at typical rates. I'm getting what those are now. And then in the rows, the tree rows themselves, before the trees were planted, organic composted chicken manure was incorporated. The cover mix growing, so what's the alley in between the tree rows, had no intentional nitrogen inputs, although the clover that was growing in the cover crop mix would certainly count as a nitrogen input. So very briefly, keeping that same color scheme, here we have a box plot with standard box plot rules. Nitrate leaching is on the y-axis. It doesn't have a unit, and that was intentional because this data is preliminary, and this method is probably best for measuring the relative differences between practices. So we don't want to get too caught up in what the actual units are. We want to compare how things right next to each other look. So the alleys have the lowest nitrate leaching rate by far. As we look at both the row and hazel lysimeters, so these are the ones that were in the actual rows, we saw quite a bit higher than in the alleys, although we saw the highest rates of nitrate leaching in the adjacent silage cornfield. So no matter where we looked in this young 1-year-old hazelnut orchard, we didn't find any nitrate leaching that was as high as the adjacent silage corn system. I want to draw attention to the numbers on this y-axis. So I wasn't sharing the unit, but let's just look that they go up to several hundred. We also ran these same extractions for ammonium, and you'll see that y-axis change from up to 800 to now up to 2, which is to say we saw almost no ammonium leaching from these soils over this period of time. It is intriguing, however, even though this is kind of negligible, that we saw a pretty clear signal and that it was actually the inverse of what we saw for nitrate leaching. So if you have an idea for a hypothesis for the mechanism that underlies this somewhat surprising, although not terribly consequential result, I'd be excited to hear it. So then when we take that hazelnut field and we apportion the different management zones to their relative space on the landscape, so the rows are a relatively small portion of the total field, we can come up with a spatially weighted nitrogen leaching in this first year hazelnut planting. And we found it was 63% less than the adjacent corn silage system. So that's great. That's quite a bit less. I will note, however, we saw almost 2 times as much nitrogen leaching from the hazelnut rows than from the hazelnut alleys in between the rows. And I think this is pretty solid evidence, although it wasn't set up to test this question exactly, that organic nitrogen sources can and do leach. So even though this was composted chicken manure, we did see what is presumably an impact of that in a little bit higher leaching rates. Monitoring is ongoing at both of these sites. So as we speak, there are lysimeters deployed at these field sites and also 5 other sites representing other agroforestry practices in Wisconsin and Illinois. So if you're thinking, wait, those are just 1-year-old trees, what will happen as the tree matures, as it occupies more of the space, as it actually becomes productive? And I think those are all very valid questions that we will get to as we continue the monitoring at these sites. I'll also note that this work was funded by the EPA Gulf of Mexico Division and the Grantham Foundation. If you happen to find yourself in the Spring Green area on the second Tuesday of the month, May to October, and you want to come out and join our community science stream monitoring that we do on one of our farms, it's a lot of fun. Shoot me an email. Kids are welcome. Kids are usually there. And this is a really fun community engagement opportunity to do some legitimate and credible research and science, but also to get a lot of folks engaged from the local area. And with that, I will hand it off.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Nate. All right. Next up, we have Billy Beck. Dr. Beck serves as the Extension Forestry Specialist, Iowa State Extension and Outreach. And I think it'll be a great transition from some of that preliminary research that Nate was showing to some of Billy's findings in regards to the water quality impacts of agroforestry in terms of edge of field practices, but also in terms of the impact of beaver dams, which I'm really interested to learn more about. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Billy.
Well, thanks, Ann. And let's see here. How's that?
We see your full PowerPoint.
Cool. Can you hear me good?
Not in presentation mode, I don't think.
Let's see here. What the heck? How's that? Good?
We're still seeing the full PowerPoint and not
Okay.
not in presentation mode or on
All
slide.
right. No. All right.
There we go.
All right. My first lesson is today is how to use Zoom. So can you hear me good?
Yeah, it sounds
Cool.
great.
Well, thanks, Ann. Thanks y'all for being here and for your patience with my Zoom skills. Like Ann said, I'm Billy Beck. I'm the Extension Forestry Specialist with ISU Extension Outreach, and I'm also with the Department of Natural Resource Ecology and Management at ISU. I've got a three-way split, as they say. So I do 60% extension, 30% research, and 10% teaching in the department. And Nate, that was an awesome setup for agroforestry. Kind of where I'm coming from, I focus on rural forest management for my extension research and teaching. And part of that, I really push to connect with the agricultural community. A lot of times I see places that, a lot of our producers do own timber, they own woodlands. And I think a lot of producers have opportunities on their farms where trees, forests, and forestry can not only benefit the overall farm enterprise, but provide all the ecosystem goods and services that society demands and receives from that resource. So when I think of agroforestry, when I'm working, I kind of lump it together. It's things like windbreaks, riparian forest buffers, riparian management, stream bank stabilization, and then finally woodlot management. When I'm dealing with the agricultural community, woodlot on-farm woodlot management. So I kind of call it on-farm forestry, but it's a good mix of agroforestry and what I would call rural forest management. So hit me up if you have questions. I know this is a quick meet and greet today, but hopefully it's not one and done. I'm pretty new here, so I've got some preliminary data that's just kind of on the cusp of getting published. So yeah, hit me up if you got further questions. So what in the heck? Well,
Billy, if you want to stop sharing, I can share since I have your slides.
yeah, good thing I did that. Jeepers.
All right.
All right, you can hit the next one. Yeah, apologies for this. Anyway, the question that everybody asks me is, do trees exist in Iowa? And the question is yes, we do have trees. We have 3 million acres of woodlands across our state. That's down from 7 million about a few hundred years ago. We're 85% privately owned. So heavy private woodland management. Private landowners have a big role in managing our woodlands in the state of Iowa. We grow some of the finest white oak and black walnut on planet Earth, and that has a big economic input. Even just, considering even more that this is only 8% of our land cover is woodland. So it supports about 50,000 jobs directly and indirectly, which those support about $5 billion. And we've got a cool economic report that can back this up. $5 billion of regional economic output every year. So if you do the math, that's about $1,700 from every acre of Iowa woodlands every year. So most of our woodlands are clustered in the east and the south. The diversity drops as you head from southeast to northwest, with tracks along with precipitation there. As you get further west and northwest, riparian or streamside forests dominate. And one more cool thing about Iowa is we have a lot of what I call species on the edge. So the upper right red arrow there, we've got a lot of northern species that are on their extreme southern limit, like balsam fir, aspen, like things that you would never consider to grow in Iowa. And in the south, we have things like post oak, blackjack oak that are on the extreme north of their range. So again, things that I would never expect or think about that would exist in Iowa. So a very, very unique forestry system here, and very, very important. So, and I see a lot of, again, opportunities on farms for trees, forests, and forestry. I've got 3 studies today that I'm just going to touch on. And just to put those in context, they all occur right where that red star is, kind of right smack in the middle of the state. That's our youngest landscape, so about 12,000 years old post-glaciation. So very, very flat, very, very poorly developed drainage networks. Nate, this is probably similar to central Illinois. So a lot of subsurface tile drainage. So that's kind of the context that we're in for these 3 studies. So you can hit the next one. So here's just a cool example of how we've incredibly, the incredible level of alteration, not only of land cover, but of our hydrology in this part of the state. So this is just an example from the Skunk River in central Iowa. We've done a lot of practices on the ground we've gotten very good at getting all the water off of our fields into the stream and out of the watershed as fast as possible to facilitate agricultural production. So this is just one example. Stream channelization, you can imagine increases in stream slope, increases in stream cross-section, increases in conductivity of water in our channels. And you can compare that on the right to those old historic meander scars of the Skunk River there. So we've really changed our hydrology in this part of the state. So we have a big disconnect between our channels and floodplains because we have a lot of channel incision. So our channels are getting deeper and wider. We have a very flashy hydrology, so very rapid response to precipitation. That photo of me there, that debris was deposited in that tree a few days before this picture was taken. So you can imagine the flashiness, that rapid response to precipitation, just looking at that picture there. You can go to the next one. So this is the first study I'll hit on. This is what I'll call a saturated riparian forest buffer project. This is funded by the Leopold Center for Sustainable Agriculture. Saturated riparian buffers are kind of an emerging edge of field practice out there. Fairly common. They're getting more common in our part of the state. Forest buffers in this practice are, I think, incredibly rare. I think Nate and I were talking about a potential one in the northern part of the state, but I really don't know. I mean, it's not, but if you know of any, please let me know. I don't know of any other saturated riparian forest buffers that are out there on the landscape. So same concept, just with trees. So we selected 3 treatments, and we selected these species for a number of reasons. We got sycamore, swamp white oak, and then a mixture of shellbark hickory and northern pecan. We wanted to use these because they're tolerant of higher soil pH. They do well with wet feet, so they can sustain some inundation, high water table in that saturated system. They provide landowners, farmers with value, so wood products, wildlife value, pollinator value. And they have what I'll call a middle of the road kind of aggressiveness as far as rooting. So they're not like a box elder or a willow or a cottonwood that really concern landowners about trees when trees are near tile. So these are kind of middle of the road as far as aggressive rooting. And then finally, these species were predicted to do well, transitioned north of their native range with climate change. So that was the factors that we went into selecting these three treatments. So this thing in general, it's just south of campus here near Ames. It's 870 feet long, 50-foot wide. That's the saturated zone. The planting is bigger as we use it as a teaching and extension site as well. But the 50-foot saturated width, so we have 4 tree rows in that saturated zone. The first row is 10 foot from the lateral tile. So if you're familiar with this practice, you can see that red arrow there. That's the lateral tile, diverting that tile flow into that riparian zone there. So if you add them both up, both sides, that's a 20-foot swath beyond that lateral tile. And we did that just because if we need to get equipment in there for any reason, for root pruning or whatever, we've got that swath available. So basically biweekly nitrate sampling during the growing season, the past 3 years. And this is just really, really quick. We're trying to get this out hopefully this summer, some of this data. But we've seen a 60 to 90% part per million reduction within that 50 feet. So at the 50-foot groundwater well, we see a 50% part per million reduction in nitrate. No real differences between tree species yet. I just think that's because they're very new. You can hit the next one. So this is what I'm really excited about. We're kind of saying stay tuned on this, but this will happen this year. Again, one of the big drivers of this project was farmers are concerned about trees and tile. And you can see this fella here. This is in Polk County. These are box elder roots that have completely clawed to clay tile. I think that's a really cool picture. So if you look at the shot on the right there, it's a former student, Everett. We've got these cleanouts at every treatment plot. So every 145 feet, we have these cleanouts. We're going to scope those hopefully this year and then continuing on annually after that to quantify in tile root intrusion for each of the treatment plots. And then of course, we're monitoring tree growth and survival and ecosystem goods and services quantification, because to promote these, I believe on the landscape, we need to know all the great things they do, not just the water quality benefits. So we had a student out there last week doing a bird survey. So that was kind of cool. You can hit the next one. All right, the next one I'll call Forest to Farm. So this focuses on wood chip bioreactors. Similar process as saturated riparian forest buffers, but just giant hole in ground filled with carbon media, accepts tile drainage, and denitrification or nitrogen removal occurs in that system. Very, very similar to a saturated riparian forest buffer. So as a forester, I was always curious about which tree species, or if tree species perform differently in these bioreactors as carbon media. And also as a forester, I wanted to kind of link water quality and the forestry communities together and thinking about, okay, if there's species out there that we remove in sustainable forest management to meet landowner goals and to provide ecosystem goods and services through forest management, and also species that don't have a really high market value, what if those performed well? And maybe we could further encourage landowners to conduct active forest management while at the same time improving our water quality. So this started out as a column scale lab experiment back in 2020. And we selected 4 species that are, again, commonly removed. And we chose a gradient of densities for these. We chose hackberry, shagbark hickory, hard maple, and cottonwood. And we collected a lot of things: carbon effluent, phosphorus, and then greenhouse gas, dissolved greenhouse gas, methane, and nitrous oxide. But here, just a real quick, just as N mass removal, cumulative over the 150-day experiment from those columns. And you can see hackberry and shagbark hickory really separated themselves from the pack there. On this my screen here, it's not showing that too well, but in the bold there, hackberry and shagbark hickory had the highest mean rates of removal for nitrogen over that time period. And there was other really interesting trends with carbon and the greenhouse gases. So those 2 species did perform the best in the lab. And one thing that was neat about this was our density hypothesis didn't really hold true. Hard maple is much, much more dense than hackberry. But one thing that's interesting here, and this is just, again, 4 species, is that hackberry and shagbark hickory have a different physiology. They have a different vascular system arrangement versus hard maple and cottonwood. So these are the things we're starting to think of. So maybe it's not just species, but perhaps it's species groups and physiology that are driving these differences. You can hit the next one. All right. The next one, next facet of this is we got some more funding. This actually expanded from that little lab experiment into some pretty big projects here. We're going to be putting 27 field scale bioreactors in around central Iowa and looking at the influences of a range of different chip species. So we're looking at N removal, hydraulic influences, and then influences on those chips on the microbiome of those reactors. And we're really going to try to streamline wood chip sources. So how do we get these species, whatever they may be, that if they perform well or not, or a cocktail of species, how do we get them to the site when the water quality practitioners need that material? And again, for me, I'm always trying to connect the water, the ag, and the forestry crowds. So I think this is a neat project to do that, get the source of the material together, get the landowners excited about woodland management on their property, and then have the water quality practitioners have a consistent and highly performing product. So you can hit the next one. So this is the final one I'll hit on today. It deals with wood and water, so I'm all over it. So we were looking at the impacts that beaver dams have on surface water quality. This is all credit to my grad student, Andrew. He's going to be graduating this summer, so we're hoping to get this data out pretty soon. But again, really, really quick numbers here. We had 2 dams that we looked at, or I should say dam systems. There's always kind of a mother dam with these auxiliary dams associated with them. And we wanted to see the impact of individual dams, but also the impact of these dam chains. So we had a natural one, which we'll call Dam 1, which you can see Angel on top of this one. This is what I would call a natural riparian zone, natural for central Iowa. And then on the bottom right, there's Andrew, and we have basically an ag drainage ditch, a dam and an ag drainage ditch that we'll call an incised and altered riparian zone. So we've kind of got 2 different systems that we're dealing with here that we wanted to study. So you can hit the next one. So we took a series over 3 years of grab samples up and down these chains at different points, so we can kind of tease out the impact of individual dams and the chain itself. So overall, in general, here we're talking percent of the nitrate nitrogen load removed or equated to removal of these structures. The natural dam chain removed about 11.4% of that load over a 3-year period. And the incised dam chain removed over about 6% of that load over that same 3-year period. And Andrew's got great ideas about this. I think it comes down to floodplain connectivity and the cross-sectional shape of these systems. So, yeah, pretty good numbers there. Interesting numbers for this essentially free conservation practice. You can hit the next one. So we collected a lot of stuff with this, like the first 2, but this is another kind of neat example here. We wanted to see if beaver dam sediments, so the sediment trap behind these dams, perform differently as far as nitrate removal than the sediments that were present in what we'll call a reference reach. So same system, just unimpacted by the dam. Same riparian condition, but just not impacted by the dam. So Andrew would dive down into these beaver dam pools and extract sediment cores. He'd bring them back to the lab at that device that he created in the bottom there. We'd overlay them with stream water spiked to a consistent nitrogen concentration, and they'd run them for several days, taking samples every so often. And you can see here, dam 1 on the left, dam 2 on the right. Green is the dam sediment, brown is the reference reach sediment. And the dam sediments, in both cases, had a higher overall removal rate per square meter of bed than the reference reaches did. So interesting stuff there. Now he's going to put together the story. We've got the grab sample story. We've got the removal story. How do the 2 fit together? So next. Cool. Well, I'll end with this. Nate set this up really, really good. I just am a firm believer that trees, forests, and forestry can really benefit the overall ag enterprise and obviously enhance water quality and provide all the other great ecosystem goods and services that trees do. We know from studies that I think the landowners out there just need more information and they need to know what resources to connect with to make these happen. So this is a cool example in Polk County of rotational grazing operation. Wide range of agroforestry practices, but you can see that the small footprint they take up on the landscape, I think, is really, really cool. So And everybody, thanks for having me. And I really apologize for this Zoom goof up. You think after 4 years I'd be an expert at this now. So, but huge thank you.
Not a problem. It happens to the best of us still to this day. All right. So thank you so much, Millie. Really appreciate it. We're going to move now to our third speaker, Ranjith Udawatta. Ranjith, I mentioned this before, is with the University of Missouri Center for Agroforestry. For the sake of time, I won't read his full bio there, but he's going to be talking about a couple long-term studies that he's been involved with at the University of Missouri. I'll stop sharing and turn it over.
I think Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks, Anne, for the introduction. I'm going to talk about water quality benefits of agroforestry, about long-term studies. Nate did a very good job explaining types of riparian systems. The first one is alley cropping. You have pasture or crops in between tree rows. Second is forest farming. Usually, people grow medicinal plants and get very good income. Riparian buffers, silvopatch-sized livestock animals, in pasture and tree areas. This is a windbreak. Before going to my research, I would like to explain the importance of water quality. So this top right map shows the red areas and yellow areas. Red area represents about 67 million acres. Yellow is about 150 million acres. Each dot is 5,000 acres of land having highly erodible soils. Yellow is non-highly erodible soils. There are some conservation practices that has reduced the erosion, but Cox et al. Says these values are 12 times lower than actual losses. This is a new recent EPA report. It shows streams and rivers, about 58% are impacted by agriculture, lakes 40%, estuaries about 30%. Sediment coming from cropland or other areas, impact water, livestock, poor management types, they are on the stream, no fencing, no riparian buffers. Sometimes you can lose even your equipment into the streams. And all these sediment and nutrients can accumulate finally in the ocean. So the hypoxia zones increase. If you look at the increase of hypoxia zones during the last 100 years, in 1910, less than 5 hypoxia zones all over the world. Now it's over 400. It's a 400% increase in hypoxia zones due to water quality degradation in other areas. So it's not just a problem of US. So there are other countries also losing a lot of sediment. Red high-risk areas all over Italy, Spain, or other countries. You see the hypoxia zone, east, west coast of US, European region, South America, China, Japan, India. Australia has only 2 spots. So what happens with the changing climate conditions, as you have observed during the last 2 or 3 weeks? Increasing precipitation intensity. If the mean annual precipitation increased by 40%, sediment loss will increase by 95%. Mean annual precipitation increased by 40%, runoff increases by 100%. Increasing runoff means removing a lot of topsoil. This is a study in Iowa. They looked at 2 different soil types, till-derived soil and loess-derived soils. If you lose the topsoil, corn yield will be decreased by 30%. Loess soils, corn yield will be decreased by 13%. In tropical countries also, this study was published in Science in 2003 that shows sharp decline in land productivity. So we started 2 long-term studies. On the left panel, there are 3 watersheds. West is grass buffer watershed. Middle one is the agroforestry watershed. Those black dots represent trees. This image was taken in 2015. The study was started in 1990. And the east side, there's a control watershed. All of these watersheds have flumes, approach sections, water samplers, and flow meters. On the right side, that's a replicated study. These 2 lines are cottonwood, 4 rows of trees representing riparian area. Then this is the grazing area. This one and this one, grass buffer. This one and this one, no buffers. That's the control. 2 riparian buffers, 2 grass buffers, grazing area. They also have the same equipment setup. So as you know, watershed studies cannot be replicated. So we used a paired watershed approach. Let me explain what is paired watershed approach. From 1991 to 1997, we collected water samples, but there were no treatments. Slope is from south to north. Water samples are here at the end of the watershed. Collected water samples, analyzed for sediment, total nitrogen, total phosphorus, nitrate, and dissolved phosphorus. After 7 years of data, we were satisfied that we could establish relationships among watersheds to estimate runoff or sediment or nutrient losses. Then we established treatments in 1997. On the west watershed, these wide gray lines represent grass buffers. On the middle watershed, wide gray lines represent tree grass buffers. And this is still the control watershed. Black areas are grass waterways. They were there from the beginning of the study. So trees were planted in 1997. They were about 1 meter tall, and now they are about 8 meters on average. Canopy closure has occurred, and those trees look really good at the Greenlee Center. So during the calibration period, that is 91 to 97, we have collected 110 runoff events. So establish relationship between the control watershed, that is C, and the grass buffer watershed, control watershed and the agroforestry watershed. We were satisfied. R square was 97, total phosphorus, total nitrogen, nitrate, and dissolved phosphorus. Numbers are smaller because some of the events don't generate runoff to collect water samples, but there are small runoff events. So how do you use these relationships? This is to show for runoff, control watershed, relationship between the control and grass buffer watershed. So if you know the runoff volume of the control watershed, we can estimate the runoff volume of the grass buffer or agroforestry watershed, because we have a very strong relationship for 7 years of data. So let me explain how do we see the agroforestry effect. This example, I am using April 15th, 1999 rain event. We had about 7 centimeters of runoff. Agroforestry watershed, we observed 401 cubic meters per hectare runoff. Control watershed, 651. Since we have a good relationship, we can estimate the runoff, predicted runoff, if trees had not been there. So that is the predicted runoff based on that equation. So the agroforestry effect is 400 minus 501. So it's 100 cubic meter runoff reduction due to agroforestry buffers. It's a 20% reduction for that runoff event. So now the watersheds look like this in 2015. Trees were planted in 1997. A lot of disturbance. We have to dug holes, tractors, soil removal. So runoff was much higher compared to the predicted equation. As time goes on, runoff concentration, everything decreased with time. So we have published 3 papers, 2002 JEQ, 2011 JEQ, and 2023 agroforestry systems. Basically, it shows 39% reduction in sediment loss compared to the control watershed. Total nitrogen loss was reduced by 43%, total phosphorus by 48% by this kind of agroforestry management systems on these 2 watersheds. So now we looked at groundwater. So until now, I have explained the changes in surface water quality. Now we looked at groundwater. We established 2 transects of deep wells at the other research station grazing area. One is a summit well, mid-slope well, and the third well is below the agroforest riparian buffer. On the other transect, summit well, mid-slope well, third well is below the grass buffer. So we collected water samples every other week. This is to give an idea. Summit well is about 11 meters, 14 meters deep. Middle well is about 11. Down the buffer is about 4 meters. So this shows the configuration of the well riparian buffer, and the other well is downed buffer. So results showed summit total nitrate and total nitrogen concentrations were 2.7, 3.35, mid slope well 2.53, 2.99. And if you look at the concentration down the riparian buffer, nitrate 0.03, nitrite 0.1. Concentrations down the grass buffer, nitrate 0.09, total nitrogen 0.3. It's a three times reduction due to trees. Trees are cottonwood trees. They are fast growing. Now they are about 20 meters tall and they have a deep root system. They are using a lot of nitrate from the groundwater, as well as they are adding carbon to the soil that helps denitrification. So these two studies show adoption of agroforestry can help improve surface water and groundwater quality. Since we had all kinds of data, topography, soil, management, measured data, we did a model simulation for 30 years. So to understand what will happen within if you continue this management for 10, 20, and 30 years, we looked at different scenarios, riparian buffer and the mid-slope buffer, riparian buffer different shapes, and mid-slope buffer. All the buffer areas here in the middle, different shapes. So what we saw was reduction in runoff, much higher if we have a riparian buffer and upland buffer. And total phosphorus, total nitrogen losses were also reduced when you do a 30-year simulation, which shows if you reduce the slope length, slope steepness by establishing a buffer in the middle, that can help reduce total nitrogen and total phosphorus losses in the if you continue in this kind of studies. Basically, our results show adoption of agroforestry can help improve surface water quality and groundwater quality. That's all I have for now. Thank you very much for listening. I will stop share.
All right, great. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Looks like we have some questions coming here and for folks, so I will jump right into it. A note for folks, please add your questions to the Q&A panel here, and you can also upvote other questions. So if someone asked a question similar to you, please upvote that individual. Looks like Steve here has a question. I believe this came in for Nate. He's curious about alley ammonium leaching and if pH was tested.
Yeah, great question. That was kind of where my mind went immediately as well. We have soil cores, they'll be processed. They haven't been processed yet. So we will have that data, but I don't have it available today.
Yeah, gotcha. I know you were just showing some preliminary data. Greg is also curious if he's saying ammonia leaching, would most ammonia be converted to NO3 over a year? Or is that nitrate?
Yeah, I suppose so. I guess what's happening is you don't have as complete conversion of ammonium to nitrates or nitrification in that alley crop or in that alley setting. And then the mechanism underlying that, yeah, I'm not sure. It is very tiny. I mean, the ammonium leaching was practically zero.
Yeah, great. Thanks. Question for Dr. Beck. How do these riparian tree species handle herbicide drift, or any research that you know of that looks at the buffers or windbreaks and herbicide drift or herbicide resistance?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah.
I deal with that a lot. I don't know any studies off the top of my head. I mean, I will say it all comes down to, I think, what time the leaf emergence time and when those leaves are vulnerable to drift. And then obviously every year the application periods are a little bit different. So that's a great question. I don't have an answer at this point, but for windbreaks and buffers too, it's almost like we need a few sacrificial rows or something upwind to disrupt those currents to protect the species that we're truly interested in. So awesome question. Yeah, big issue. So
Yeah. And then I hear one here for Ranjith. About the long-term site. What are your thoughts about how the various treatments stand up to climate changes seen from that 1990 that you started monitoring to today?
So we have been, since we have the calibration data for smallest to largest runoff event, sometimes we had about 6 inches of rain. You might remember 1997, the whole area was flooded. So we have calibration data collected from maybe smallest about half a centimeter rainfall event all the way to 15, 16 centimeter event. I think we have a strong relationship to address the rainfall events caused by climate events.
Gotcha. Thanks. This question is for all three of you. Have you thoughts about how transferable the water quality impacts that you're noting with agroforestry would be to other regions within the United States, or I guess even internationally?
Internationally, agroforestry started, as you know, in China and other countries. They all know all the benefits. In the US, agroforestry is somewhat different compared to Asian countries. In Asian countries, it's a multi-species vegetation, large tree, several canopy levels. That means several root levels also. Those systems occupy the root volume much efficiently compared to what we have here, like more structured systems. We conducted a study about soil moisture dynamics, which shows when you have trees in during high rainfall areas times, it can store more water in the soil because trees leaf out before the crop. Usually it starts transpiring water maybe end of March, beginning of April. During that time, ground is still open, right? Crop is planted in maybe late May, early June. So that's when the crop areas start losing soil water. So that means adoption of agroforestry significantly removes soil water, and also it improves storage capacity due to increases in soil physical properties, carbon, root infiltration. Thereby, it can cut down the runoff volume and also improve the soil water storage. It can help improve water quality, as our studies have shown.
Right.
Deep water and also modeling.
Yeah, I'll echo everything that Ranjith said, and as well as, you know, the United States is not at the helm of these efforts. So if you're anywhere else in the world, there's a reasonable likelihood that there's more research and more agroforestry around you than there is here. So yeah, I'll second that point there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just add that I think that you really have to take the hydrology and the water quality, like the nutrient. We have very high nutrient loads here in Iowa, so that's just something to consider as a context in our hydrology too. So I think we need a lot more research in these highly altered systems.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that. Andrew has a question. I believe this one is for Nate that got upvoted here. Have you thought about comparing in-leaching rates with the silage and alley hazelnuts while giving both sites the same manure application rates?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because this was a 1-year-old tree, I think sometimes in nutrient studies, we apply the same amount to two systems, whether or not it would make any sense, because we want to hold that application rate constant. Because these were 1-year-old trees, no one would probably ever apply that much nitrogen to 1-year-old trees. That being said, as the trees mature and they become productive and we start harvesting hazelnuts from them, then there is certainly going to be more nitrogen demanded by that system and more of a response, more of a kind of logic. So I don't know if we'll get to the point that we have exactly the same nitrogen inputs in both of these systems. We'll sort of see as they develop. But certainly this is kind of year 1 data, and in the coming years, the productive hazelnut site will look more like the control site in terms of productivity and inputs and that sort of thing.
Right. Yeah. In terms of the maturity of those trees. Great. Thanks. Jordan is curious. This is probably for you, Billy, but if anyone else has thoughts too about the reintroduction projects for beaver reintroduction, or it seems like some lower hanging fruit, if you're noting that does have an impact on, nutrient levels.
Yeah, I'm vaguely familiar with one outfit, and I can't even remember their name, in the state of Iowa that does kind of facilitate this.
Yeah.
But that got me thinking, like, I'm not sure I'd have to look into the legal aspect of moving wildlife around. Like
True.
that's a point. And then one side project of or side effort of Andrew's overall project is we're really looking at, you know, we've mapped these dams as they change and break and move over the past 3 years, and we're just really interested in getting some kind of idea on, okay, where do they tend to build these? You know, where in the watershed, but also where in the specific reach that we're looking at. So that could be some kind of introductory information. And okay, this is how many dams or families or colonies that this, you know, X kilometers can support. And you also have to think about the habitat too. I think, you know, we're not just, we're looking for numbers. Are they doing this or doing that? We're not saying we're not promoting beavers on the landscape. We're just kind of looking at, what are they doing out there as far as in-channel nutrient removal? So I think it's very complex, especially in an agriculturally dominated state. I don't
Yeah.
think they belong everywhere, but where they have an opportunity, I think they can potentially, from Andrew's numbers, they could potentially do a lot of good. So
That's interesting. And we're getting some discussion here of, have you heard of beaver dam analogs? People are saying, you know, maybe if you put them in, then active engagement isn't necessary. Like they will come in with the analogs, or they've even been dropped out of airplanes for you.
Yeah.
Is that something that you're aware of or have more information on? I think that's interesting discussion. Personally, I'm not familiar with it.
Yeah, actually, we've seen a few beaver dam analogs, which are basically fake beaver dams installed throughout the state.
Okay.
A lot of them through what's the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I think it's called the Iowa Partners for Conservation. I could be getting that wrong, but the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, I think it's a cost shareable practice with them. I could be wrong again, but we toured some of these. I think they just have a little bit of a different end goal when you're talking about dams. So beaver dams, we've cut these things open. They are a living mass. They are solid. They are strategically placed stones and obviously wood and grass and mud and sediments that they're packed together. These analogs are basically stakes in the stream that have woven willow in between them. So they're pretty porous. So when we've seen beaver dam analogs used in Iowa, they're mostly for grade control. So kind of trying to build up that stream bed. So I think they would both do good things, but there might be a little bit difference in what exactly they do and how they impact water quality. But yeah, I mean, they're definitely a practice out there. And, you know, when you do that, when you have a stable substrate, we've noticed that that's where the beavers build. Like there was a stream we know of that had a series of gravel check dams or grade control structures in them. Every single one had a small auxiliary dam on it. So no, I'm very interested in those analogs, but I think they operate a little bit differently than a natural dam would.
It's not the same. It's not the same, but could be still a part of the solution. Kyle just put in a link for folks about that Partners for Fish and Wildlife program that Billy was just mentioning.
Yeah, that's right. It's not the Iowa partner. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. I didn't get the name right, but yeah.
Okay. Definitely interesting things about nature's engineers and how they can impact our water quality. I think, let's see. I believe that is all the questions. There was also a question about the, you know, equipment or lysometer used, and Nate put in an answer to that. So feel free to check that out if you're of interest to folks. And we do have just a minute or two left, so I will go ahead and share my screen here and provide the information for everyone. So if you have additional questions for our speakers today, thank you so much, Nate, Billy, and Ranjith, for taking your time, lending your expertise to talk a little bit about your work and providing their emails up there for everyone. If you have a question or would like to engage with them, feel free to reach out. I did mention this was the 99th edition of the current webinar series. So next month is 100. We're having a 100th webinar celebration where we're going to be talking about multi-state water work, so giving some great examples of it and promoting some upcoming partnerships and collaborations. So I hope you can join us for that. That'll be Wednesday, June 12th at 2 p.m. And with that, I will go ahead and end it. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. And thank you to our speakers for presenting.